Good afternoon, YouTube friends, and welcome to another video all about fire. Yes, I'm a pyromaniac. I think I am, seriously. I love fire. And I love all the things that an open fire gives to you in terms of its benefits. The sound, the smell, the heat, just that coziness of sitting on a cold winter's evening with a crackling fire. Gorgeous, what could be better? But there are pros and cons, and I'm going to explore a few of those in this little video, especially for you. You might remember that I did a video a few years ago about setting a traditional fire using newspaper firelighters, kindling, which are sort of dried twigs of wood, and smokeless fuel. Smokeless fuel is what we have to use here in London, and if we are going to use wood, it's got to be seasoned, well dried hardwood that catches light very quickly and burns in a clean way, so we're not filling the atmosphere with smoke. So this year I'm going to try a slightly different method of setting a fire using a natural firelighter, which I've got here, which I've bought recently, and some smokeless fuel. Slightly different to what I've done in the past. Whether it will work or not, I do not know, but I'm pretty good at lighting fires. I've been doing it for years, so fingers crossed that that will work. But it is at this time of year that we here start to think about how we're going to heat our house. And I know that sounds a bit strange. Most people would say, well, you put the heating on. Well, this year it's a little bit different because we've really got to think about the bills that we are simply not going to be able to afford if the gas and electricity prices continue to rise in the way that they say they're going to. We're just not going to be able to afford to heat this house. So we have to think about the cold areas of the house, the areas that keep the heat the best, and work with that. And in terms of preparing for that, I've already checked our heating system. I've bled the radiators. If you're not sure what that means, it's where you use a radiator key and you release any excess air that is in the radiator to help them to work more efficiently. So I've done all of that. Our heating is working. We're sort of thinking about keeping certain radiators on a very low temperature. I've already turned down the one in here. You can just see it behind me with the radiator cover, which again is not a great idea because it traps the heat, but I don't like the look of radiators. So I've already done that. Our heating is working. That's all great, but we're not going to be able to afford to heat the whole house all of the time, every day. So I thought to myself, well, we haven't had fires for the past couple of years for a couple of reasons. Mainly the guilt around polluting the atmosphere, and, having to buy coal, having to do the work, all of that, and also blackening the ceiling in here. That does happen over time. It'll take a few years to become noticeable, but it was noticeable in here. So I decorated a few years ago and I really don't want to ruin it. So I'm taking steps to try and counteract that as well. You'll be able to see behind me, I've got one of these air filters. I've got a couple of them. I'm going to be using that in this room to try and suck up any excess smoke and soot. But having said that, I've sort of worked out that in terms of having a fire in here, it would be cheaper to heat this room by having a coal fire. So I've ordered some coal, and I've ordered an eco coal, which is partially made from olive pits. And I've got these eco firelighters as well. I'm not talking about having a fire every day. We've also prepared our little snug room at the back of the house as the only room that will have the radiator on full. It's a small radiator, it's a small room, so that will keep us warm if necessary, if we don't want to use this room. You've got to bear in mind that this is a Victorian property with the original Victorian fireplace, built in around 1850, I think this house was. It has wooden floors and air bricks, which are located at the front and the side of the building, which allow for air circulation, which was very important when coal fires were being used regularly, because, as you know, fire requires oxygen, heat, and a source of fuel. So, all of that taken into consideration, this can be a very drafty room. I mean, essentially, a chimney is an open hole going right to the top of the house, which constantly allows air to circulate. And there are some people that would say, well, that's quite healthy. I'm one of them. I prefer to be in a ventilated house rather than an hermetically sealed house, which a lot of modern houses are, to retain heat. And I agree with that as well, but I wonder how we would fare in a modern house. I think we'd find it terribly stuffy and airless. So it kind of suits us, but it does mean that heating a property like this is expensive, so we're having to take control of that. We're choosing this year not to put our heating on yet until it gets very cold. We have not put the heating on other than testing the system, which I did the other day. And the house stays around 15 to 16 degrees centigrade. So that's not too bad. Some would say it's quite cold, and it's certainly under the recommended livable temperature, which I think is around 18 to 20. And we do wear layers. I've got 3 layers on at the moment, and a scarf, my trousers, socks and slippers. And later on this evening I will put my comfortable trousers on, and I'll put a thermal pair underneath to stay warm. May not need to do that this evening because I think a fire is in the offing, most definitely. We're going to give ourselves a little bit of luxury this evening because these firelighters arrived, so I can light a fire. So when it does get very cold, we will put the heating on. And like I said earlier, this radiator is on low, as are the large radiators in the bedroom, the middle room. Some are controllable, some aren't. I've turned some off, the ones at the top of the house, which is an area that does stay quite warm. It gets a lot of sun and it's also insulated. They will be turned off too, or maybe on very low. Being mindful, of course, that on a very, very cold day, we don't want any pipes to freeze. So let's talk about the fire. We had the chimney swept yesterday, which was great. Not had it swept for a few years now. For the reasons I said earlier, we've not been having fires, feeling a little bit guilty about putting any pollutants into the atmosphere. I'm afraid the government have paid to that now, because we are going to be doing that, because we do need to have some warmth in the house. So the chimney was swept, all is good. When a sweep visits your house to do the chimney, they will give you a sort of thumbs up, sign it off to say that the flue is clear of soot and creosote, whatever was up there, and is now good to go, and you can start lighting fires. The reason you have your chimney swept is because soot is flammable, and if it builds up it can lead to a chimney fire, which is not what you want. I remember my grandparents having a chimney fire years and years ago, and the fire brigade had to be called, and it's a very messy business. It's not a good idea to allow that to happen. So chimney swept at least once a year, twice if it's heavy use, to keep it safe. Our chimney is approximately 11 yards long, the flue. It is about 8 inches wide, and it's lined in a steel liner. Now these are used quite commonly with wood burning stoves that people have. They're actually sealed to the top of the stove. Here it's a little bit different. The liner was put in by the previous owners of the house because there was smoke seeping into other areas of the house as it travels upwards. So it was fully lined, and that's intact, which is great news, and it's working as it should. The chimney sweep will do a smoke test where they light a little smoke bomb and set it off to make sure that it's drawing. But one thing that I always tend to do before I light a fire is I crack open the window to allow good airflow to get the fire going so it doesn't blow back. On a windy day you might get a bit of blowback into the room, and that's where this air filter comes in handy to try and suck any of that away, which I think is a good idea. On the top of the house we have 4 chimney pots, and that generally indicates that there would have been 4 fireplaces in the house. So we would have had one here, one in the bedroom straight up there, and one in the middle room, and above it in what is now the bathroom. Of course that wouldn't have been a bathroom, it would have been another bedroom. So can you imagine 4 open fires in a Victorian house? There would have been quite a bit of sweeping necessary for that. And of course you've got the very checkered history of chimney sweeps as well, who used to employ small children. Do some Googling on that if you're interested in the history, because it was quite horrific. There were frequent deaths. Children frequently were sent up hot chimneys, sometimes naked, to make it easier. And they would have been bruised and battered and cut, just horrendous. And this went on, I think, until a bill was passed in 1875 to stop this from happening. But apparently it still did for many years after that. So, I mean, just unbelievable, absolutely crazy. I dread to think, that a child could have been shimmying up this chimney at some point to clear out the soot. Just dreadful, dreadful, dreadful. Oh, I shudder. I really do. And I also think it's fascinating that we live in a house that has such age, The 1850s, I mean, that was a long time ago. I mean, you can see on this chimney that it has age. A lot of these chimneys the chimney breasts are very often plastered over, and what's called a Victorian fireplace in iron is put in. We don't have that. We have a traditional grate, an open grate, or a fire basket, I think they're sometimes called, made in iron. So I think it's time to have a little look at the fire in detail and attempt to set a fire using these EcoBlaze natural firelighters. They're made of wood, sort of shredded wood, which I believe is coated in wax. They're meant to have no smell, very little smoke, and they're sustainable as well, so better option than the chemical ones that I was going to use that I mentioned in Sunday chat. I'm going to give it a go. So let's have a little look at the fireplace. I'll move this gorgeous fireguard, which we bought in Guernsey along with the companion set. We had to get it onto the plane as oversized luggage, but I love it. And it's an essential piece of equipment, really. If you have ever used house coal, that's the old style coal, it's very smelly, very smoky. That used to spit, and you don't want your Persian rugs catching fire. So I always err on the side of caution, even with smokeless fuel. And if I'm out of the room and the fire is going to be left unattended for any time whatsoever, this fire guard gets put up straight away. And it should cover the whole opening, which this almost does. Let's have a little look. So this is the chimney breast. You can see the hearth with the coal bucket and the opening there, and then the original brick chimney breast which goes right up to the ceiling. And we love it this way. It was like this when we came into the house, and we wouldn't change it. We love the character of that brick and the colour. And you can see where it's blackened over time through repeated use of the fire. They must have had some big fires back then. Let's have a look at the opening, the inglenook. I mean, this could be described as a small inglenook fireplace, which is the recess where the grate, the fire basket, sits. Let's have a closer look. Let's get this fire guard out of the way first. So this is where the fire will be lit. You've got the recess, which is the inglenook, and then you've got this iron-made fire basket or grate, or whatever you want to call it, which will also act as a heater, because it will heat up and then radiate that heat hopefully back into the room. Let's go in closer and attempt to light some coals. I'm going to open the window a little bit first. So I mentioned earlier that I'm using these natural firelighters. It says use 1 or 2 firelighters, 1 to 2 firelighters. Once burning, build fire with kindling or charcoal. Okay, well, we'll have to see whether that's going to work. Let's have a look at them, see what they look like. So here they are. They're sort of tightly packed bundles of shredded wood, which I believe are coated in wax. 1 or 2? I don't know, I'm yet to be convinced. Let's give it a go. So these are smokeless coal briquettes. They don't really resemble natural house coal, which are more like sort of rocks, really, shiny rocks. These are designed to catch light and kick out heat and reduce to virtually nothing. So I'm going to start with the firelighters, put a few of these on. I'm going to start small, to be honest, because that's the best way to proceed. So you don't end up with a fire basket full of things that aren't burning. So let's give it a go. It's also worth noting as well that I use a tray. This is an old baking tray, and I use that to catch any ash, and it just fits in neatly. Okay, I'm going to use 3 of these, to be honest, because I don't trust them. I mean, they're probably great, but they're all different sizes as well. And very often in bits too, so there's a little bit of coal, leftover coal in the back there, which I'm just going to leave. I'm going to just put a couple of bits of coal on top of the firelighters. I'm not pressing it down, just being gentle. You don't want to cut off the air supply, and I'm literally going to leave it at that to see whether these coals are going to catch light. I'm using my super duper non-gas lighter. I'm just going to light these and see what happens. Okay, so there's a good flame, really good flame. Hope that's not too bright. And that's got to burn long enough to set a coal on fire. And all we really need is a coal, 1 or 2 of the coals, to light. We can start adding more coal. Very often as the fire reduces, as the fire lighting element reduces, be it kindling or paper, the coals will sometimes shift and drop, so you may need to go in with a pair of tongs to move the coals around initially. But it's looking good. It's a pretty flame. It's drawing well. I'm not seeing much smoke at all. It's going straight up the chimney, which is lovely. And what I'm looking for is evidence of the coals starting to glow. There we go. I told you that would happen. We're going to move that coal using our tongs. It's smoking, that coal, so that's good. That's a good sign. Sometimes a bit tricky. Whether it's enough to actually start the fire, I don't know. Now, if you find that a fire doesn't seem to be getting on and catching well, you can add a bit of air in the form of the bellows. I've got some cute little bellows here. Go for the base. Just add a little bit of air. It looks like a pathetic fire. It's not the kind of fire that I'm used to, and it's certainly not kicking out any heat at the moment. Okay, I'm going to add just a little bit more of this firelighter. There's a small piece there. I'm just going to add that in. Yeah. Don't use your hands, people. They certainly burn bright, and I did say this was an experiment. I'm still not convinced. I think I'm going to pop one just on this side there, and then like that. Just for good measure, I'm going to pop one on the other side. Told you I was a pyromaniac. I'm just going to nudge that one very gently, just underneath the coals. That's looking a bit more promising now. So by my reckoning, that took, I think it was about 4 or 5 of those firelighters. And I can see in the centre, not sure whether you can see that, but there is flames that look as though they're emanating from the coals. Yeah, it's okay. What you need to do now, when you got to this stage, is wait until you see the coals starting to really glow, and then gently add a coal at a time using the tongs. And you should be able to keep it going. Well, after several more firelighters and a bit of cajoling, we've finally got some glowing coals. I've just put some more firelighters on, so actually I've ended up using, when it says use 1 to 2, I've probably used at least 10 to get a few coals to light. And that's what you're seeing now. I've added 2 more. It's a very slow process this way. It's a little bit painful, but sometimes you have to take your time making a fire. And these coals aren't cold either, they've not been outside. So, yeah, okay, they don't smoke as much, but they're not as effective, certainly not. I've got some other ones arriving that are called, I think they're called Twizzlers. So at some point I'll see how they get on. But, you know, we've got a nice warm glow for this evening, which is a real treat. So we will enjoy that. And for the moment, I'm going to say goodbye and happy fire lighting if you're a pyromaniac like me. I'm going to enjoy this. Those firelighters are dying down now. And I can see, you won't be able to detect it from there, but I can see that we have glowing coals. So I'm going to start spreading the coals out a little bit and putting a couple of new ones on top so we get a bit more heat coming into the room. But, you know, that's giving me a pleasant warm glow already. Thanks for watching. I hope you found it interesting, and take care of yourselves. See you very soon. Stay warm. Bye for now.